Welcome to Special Report Online. I'm Brett Barron, Washington. If you haven't been here before, welcome aboard. Different kind of format, a little looser with the panel. We have Steve, David, and Charles back with us. And before we turn to immigration, an issue we wanted to get to, continuing the conversation on the election. And we'll have people weigh in, comments, questions for the panel. Steve, you were saying, is the establishment coalescing around one candidate, or are they punting on the Donald Trump issue?
No, I mean, this is what's so ironic about the cycle. And look, I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of the individual campaigns, it makes some sense. But you're seeing at this moment, I mean, really for the past several months, but you're seeing at this moment virtually nobody up on the air attacking Donald Trump. Jeb Bush had a little, sort of a mini buy, but before that it was almost literally nothing. Meanwhile, Marco Rubio has had ad after ad attacking him from super PACs of Jeb Bush and other establishment candidates who are trying to climb over one another to get to the point where they can be the so-called establishment lane alternative to Cruz and Trump. But the greater irony is, if in doing that, they've basically elevated Trump by not attacking him on these points where he's the weakest, he could easily sail to the Republican nomination. I don't think there's anybody alive at this point who thinks that Donald Trump can't win the Republican nomination.
But after New Hampshire, doesn't the party overall, whoever the party is, the leadership, go to those other candidates and say, it is time to get out?
But even if they do, I mean, if you're Jeb Bush, let's say Jeb Bush doesn't have a great showing in Iowa and a mediocre showing in New Hampshire, but he's got a ton of super PAC money. He's just been endorsed by Lindsey Graham, who no doubt asked him if he was committed to staying in the primary through South Carolina.
Who left the race at 0%.
Jeb Bush doesn't get out. Yeah, but I mean, you sort of don't want to embarrass Graham.
But it is astonishing that these candidates feel, maybe you put Cruz in a separate category because he's drafting so close to Trump, so he's waiting for a misstep and thinks that he can inherit that support. But if you're Marco Rubio, and it is striking, you were making this point, I mean, a Tea Party favorite when he ran and was elected to the Senate, a lot of the Tea Party activists say, if you had told me that Marco Rubio would be considered an establishment choice, we would have told you were crazy.
It was Gang of Eight that got him there.
Yeah. But the idea that they don't take on Trump substantively, ideologically, temperamentally, on electability, and do it and hammer every day in and out is a sign that you're just too weak to do it, or you're too worried about his response and what he'll do to you. And imagine if everybody was doing that, it could have some potential impact. But if you're Rubio in particular, you do hope that Trump shows some sign of weakness in Iowa. So maybe there's a little bit of room for him to get some momentum going into New Hampshire.
I mean, it doesn't appear, you said in the show, that there is any kryptonite, that there is one issue that takes Trump down. Or there doesn't seem to be much that anybody can hit him on, even in an effective ad.
Because he's not running on issues. Right. His support, which is unwavering, it seems to me, because his numbers ratchet up. They did for, I think there was a short stretch in the fall when they ratcheted down, but not that much. There's nothing that he says, there's no ideological point that brings him down, because he's running on one thing, the idea of strength, the idea of being tough. Everybody is soft, everybody's weak, everybody's low energy, and his appeal is, look, I don't know how I'm going to do ISIS, or he pretends he does. I don't know how I'm going to bring the jobs back. I'll send Carl Icahn. Just trust me. I've succeeded in life, I'll succeed here. This is a classic campaign. He's running as a strong man, as they would say in Latin America or elsewhere. So the content of what he says, which is what is so amazing, because no one's ever run a campaign, is completely irrelevant. But apart from the fact that the establishment candidates aren't touching him, is that they're cannibalizing each other. Right. There's no party that'll be able to go to them, because the party, the establishment, is a fiction. It doesn't exist. It's not like the wise man who went to see Nixon at the end of the Watergate, the few senators led by Goldwater and others who said, the gig is up, you have to resign. That doesn't exist anymore. It's sort of a free-for-all party system that we have today. That was not true 50 years ago. And because, look, if you look at the numbers of the four establishment candidates, Bush, Rubio, Christie, and Kasich, It's a good thing I got through that.
Yeah,
Almost
that would've
did
been
a Rick
repaired.
Perry.
You did the 4, you
but that-
named the number.
Yeah, I know.
Never
You
go down the list.
Never, and you never say the amount,
The
number.
number,
in it.
that's
Up
the
top, that's
Yeah,
the key.
I know that was it. I walked the wire on that one. That was close. But if you add up their numbers, that comes out to about 40 to 50%. If that were one person, it would be topping Trump and Cruz, and you would have a legitimate three-way race, and nobody would be saying that Trump is the most likely to win the nomination, or is a shoo-in for the nomination. But that's not going to happen. I don't think anybody, after running for 6 months, steps out because it's for the good of the party.
And it's also, I mean, think about what motivates these candidates to run in the first place. I mean, to a certain extent, you could say it's altruism or they want to improve the country, but most of it is, big ego stroke. I mean, that's the point. I agree with the second part of what you were saying, but I dissent from both the comments from our former NBC newsman and former
By the way-
Mondale speechwriter here.
Wow.
Let me dissent. Let me dissent.
You're just dropping
these-
bombs
these-
here?
that was a Trumpian attack.
Yeah, oh
That
my
was
God, it was
Trumpian.
unbelievable.
Yes, that was.
It's not an attack. I'm just stating facts here. I mean,
Right.
I can't believe you guys. No, the problem, I think the bigger problem, there are two problems. One, I think Trump can be hit. The problem is nobody's hit him for the reasons that we all, I think, agree on. But there's a way to hit Donald Trump. I think one certainly would be to remind voters, if you had a $10, $20 million ad budget in Iowa and New Hampshire, to remind voters of his positions on all of these wide range of issues, from proposing the biggest tax hike in the history of mankind to single payer health care, all of these places where he's out of step with the conservatives who make up a huge chunk of the Iowa Republican caucus goers, number one. Number two, and also remind them, I think, notably, remind them that he contributed money. Not only did he believe these things that are, say, heterodox positions for a Republican candidate, he gave money to support the people who were advancing them, like Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton. Second, take away Trump's self-portrayal as a spokesman for the everyman and point out that he's taken away money taken away homes from
Cruz is starting
people
to
who
do
are
that.
not right,
Cruz
which is
went
a very smart.
litany of things, including eminent domain,
Correct. Right.
including crony capitalism,
All
including
of these things,
But-
I
but-
think
but
he's very
the first-
vulnerable on. It's just that nobody's done it. You can't say it hasn't worked.
But that's the point, that nobody's done it. I mean, what Cruz did was actually pretty clever with the New York values bit. Now, it backfired on him in the debate, but it had a particular audience in Iowa, and there are people who get it. But I think the litany is much more effective. I read the Wall Street Journal editorial on Bernie Sanders today, was incredibly damning because it just said what he was for.
Yeah.
You don't have to attack everybody as a phenomenon that's going to be horrible for the country. And by the way, the one area where I disagree, Charles, I think kryptonite for Trump is electability. How many Republicans in a general election will stay home, and how many more Democrats will be galvanized, even if they don't love Hillary, if she's the likely nominee, to go out and vote in that case? I think that's scary.
Let me just say on the first thing, attacking Trump on his liberal history would be a complete waste of money, because Trump will admit it. This is what he does.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. In fact, this system is corrupt. I know it. I was on the other side. I was purchasing
Who knows
politicians.
better than Trump?
Yeah,
That's what he'd say.
I'm the thief. I'm the one who can now go after them. I'm the Joe Kennedy, right? The shady Wall Street guy who was the first head of the SEC because he knew where all the thievery was. So he's admitted that he was on the other side, just became a politician. He was part of the corrupt system, so he's the best to go after it. So he's going to jujitsu that attack out of nowhere. I do think you could possibly do an ad in which you find the woman who held out on the casino parking lot, if she's still alive. If not, you just impersonate her. And, you say there's a guy who steals from little people. I still don't think that's going to work. And one thing I will say, given the way you characterized David and me, we're now going to spend a lot of money on opposition research.
Steve Hayes.
Don't ask Brett. Brett knows. Brett knows all this
Brett's
stuff.
our source.
I got a lot of stuff. Why do you think he's on the panel? He's got stuff on me. All right. JS John 7, train wreck in the establishment lane. And
It is. It's a pileup. It's a multi-car
Rich
pileup.
from Michigan, then why aren't such obvious attack ads being run? I mean,
Well, I think the big reason is that there is fear of Trump. That these candidates, like the rest of the political establishment, thought there was no way that Trump would get this far. So they just wanted to be there to catch those who were swooning for Trump, and they would land into their arms. And now they also, I mean, look what happened to Jeb Bush before, and he got better. He's gotten better at attacking Trump. But in the beginning, it was awful. He's high-fiving him on the stage to try to, curry favor with the guy. And he, because he came across as weak and Trump called him out on it. So I think there's a concern that Trump, who is not concerned about saying something beyond the pale, will pull you into this attack and lean into it and not be afraid of it. And that's a tough thing to go
But
against.
this hasn't been tried in any kind of a sustained way. I mean, this is where I disagree with Charles. I mean, if you are talking about a blanket ad campaign on the Iowa airwaves reminding him of all of these things, it's been tried here and there, and he's provided exactly the defense that you suggest, but it's not been a sustained campaign. It's not something that voters are going to wake up and think, oh yeah, Trump really was for single payer. That's weird.
All right, so
and
listen to
secondly,
this.
Just real quick.
Right.
Secondly, the candidates who have gone after Trump to this point, I mean, this is one of the worst talking points of the 2016 cycle. The candidates who have gone after Trump at this point have all started low. So you haven't seen a Cruz or a Rubio or even a Christie, who's probably fourth in many of these national polls, take on Trump in a sustained, systematic, methodical way.
Right.
Instead, you've had Jindal and Jindal when he was at 1%, Perry when he was at 4%, Walker when he was on his way out of the race,
Lindsey Graham
at
or Bush.
0%.
Well, and in Bush.
So Trump loves to make this argument on the stump. He says, "Look, anybody who attacks me,
They end up
they're
leaving."
gone." Well,
Right.
okay, so they're going from 0.1 to 0. I mean, it's really
But
not
aren't
any
we going to get
sign
an
of.
answer now by seeing what happens to Cruz? Isn't that a challenge by a guy who's really up there?
I think that we
Yeah.
will see this, but I think the attacks from the stump would have to be accompanied by attacks on the airways, and we've not yet seen them. Maybe we will.
Listen
but
to
we've
this
not
is
yet seen
Cruz
them.
just right now at a town hall. We're seeing something remarkable happening in the Republican primary. Right now, the Washington establishment is abandoning Marco Rubio. They've made the assessment that Marco can't win this race, and the Washington establishment is rushing over to support Donald Trump. We're seeing that happen every day, and Mr. Trump is welcoming the support of the Washington establishment. And indeed, Mr. Trump said that they should support him because he said Ted won't go along to get along. He won't make deals with the Democrats. And then he goes on in a big.
I mean, what's shocking
That's
about this is that
hilarious.
what is shocking is that he is saying that Trump would become part of the establishment. I mean, that's just, no one's ever going to believe that.
Yeah.
But
crazy.
the bigger point is that he is still trying to run a stronger ideological campaign in Iowa, which is, I think, even the bigger test, aside from just hammering him. It's hammering him as a fake conservative, not a conservative at all. And you figure if Trump does well or wins in Iowa, wins New Hampshire, I mean, in South Carolina, where you would also think there'd be an ideological campaign, running it strong and tough and pro-military, and we're going to kill ISIS, and, that's going to work very well in South Carolina. So that's where I think it gets. I think this is for Rubio to do. If he's got any life left, he's got to do it now to try to make.
He
something
ends the
happen.
dismount is that the Washington establishment knows who's willing to keep the gravy train going, who's willing to cut the deals and grow the government. And I think that's where he's going, on crony deals and not cutting government.
I think he may actually be right, but I don't think it's believable. We have now entered an alternate universe where it is true. I mean, Trump actually talks about cutting deals, compromising. His attack on Cruz is he's unable to deal with Democrats. So it is a reasonable answer to what Trump is doing.
But then he pivots to Branstad and he goes on ethanol and says, I want to cut ethanol. I'm the only one. Branstad attacks me, and now the establishment is.
I think that's the best evidence that he is not a compromiser. He's not a deal maker. He stands on principle. But of course, it's in Iowa, so it cuts two ways. I think it's probably a net zero. It shows he's a principled guy, but a lot of people in Iowa are going to vote their economic interest, and that involves ethanol. So I think he's right that Trump is the classic crony capitalist if he believes in anything. But I don't think it's going to help Cruz to pretend that the establishment is now pro-Trump.
Well,
I would say Trump is pro-establishment in the end. In the end,
it is funny. Can you imagine? You can imagine Trump as president in his first 100 days getting some huge budget deal with a huge tax increase and just saying, now I should point out that we're all at some level trying to adopt a Trump imitation. That we don't want to speak about him without speaking like him. Without saying, this is this is fabulous, and I got these people together, and we're going to do something that's fabulous, and it's fabulous. And it's huge. We're going to get a huge tax hike, but we're just going to have to deal with it.
David, who's killing us in Asia?
China. No, but look, the follow-up to Charles, I've talked to some establishment types who say that they would prefer Trump to Cruz. If it's a binary choice, they would prefer Trump to Cruz for precisely that reason. The art of the deal, he would let them sort of keep making their money, what have you. But that's, I think, first of all, a very small percentage of the actual Washington establishment, number one. And number two, the problem for Cruz in making this argument is he has hugged Trump for 6 months and talked about what a leader he was and how great he was and how terrific he was. And now to turn around as if this is all something new, as if Trump is saying something new today that he wasn't saying a week ago or a month ago or 4 months ago, it just makes Cruz look like the ultimate opportunist. I mean, it's really a hard argument for him to make. And I say that as somebody who admires him as a principled conservative on a number of issues.
Imagine the attacks on Cruz from Republicans about wanting to shut down the government, about taking on health care the way he did, about what kind of colleague he was, about his temperament, about carpet bombing, ISIS. You had Gates out there today. I mean, imagine just the Republican attack on him, which he would write off as the establishment.
All right, Scott, Mr. Duck says we should talk about the Dems a bit. I want to know if Sanders won, how much damage he could do to the country. Wouldn't he executive order all of his wishes? Well, let's turn just quickly to the Democrats. Did we move down that Sanders-Brock soundbite? Okay. I mean, is there a real chance that Sanders could win the nomination?
Well, the first thing I would do is say I really don't want to see President Sanders put a hammer and sickle on the American flag, because that would be the first executive order. I don't think that would sit well. Look, the only way he wins if Hillary gets indicted, and for some reason the mechanics of getting on the ballot are such that nobody else ends up. But even then, I think the Democratic establishment would find a way to change the rules. There'd be a revolt. They'd be screaming. It would be perhaps a bit like Chicago '68, but we can only hope.
I mean, Democrats in Iowa and New Hampshire, the party is 94% white.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party overall is 54% white, 46% black and brown.
Right.
So that's where the Hillary Clinton name alone carries huge weight in a place like South Carolina.
Right.
The rest of the country, essentially, not Iowa, New Hampshire. So if he wins Iowa, New Hampshire...
It's bad because, yet again, they've come into this campaign as they did in 2008, with this air of invincibility and inevitability. And let's be honest, I mean, there's nobody thought that even with Sanders' populism and some appeal that he was the next Barack Obama. I mean, it was a completely different movement that she was up against that she underestimated in 2008. And yet, that populism is real on the left. They are attacking Obama as being, is letting down liberals on a lot of issues. And so that support flows to him. But I don't think it carries. But it hurts her because it shows her vulnerability. It goes to overall electability. If Sanders can hurt her that badly, what are the Republicans going to do?
All right, here's Bernie Sanders and David Brock.
Here's the simple reality. No one can deny that Secretary Clinton has a lot of foreign policy experience. She was Secretary of State for 4 years. That gives you a lot of experience. But experience does not necessarily equate to judgment. Dick Cheney had a hell of a lot of experience. God help us all.
I think the elephant in the room is Bernie Sanders isn't electable. I don't believe he's electable in the Democratic Party, and he's not electable in the general election, and that's because of the elephant in the room. He's a socialist,
right?
Whose health care plan is really a tax plan. Hold on, he's been a Democrat for 5 minutes.
I mean, that is quite something, considering that Sanders, yes, they're calling him a socialist, and every surrogate is out there, socialist, socialist, socialist. But when he was in the Senate with Hillary Clinton, they voted 93% the same way.
Yeah, well, it leads you to a conclusion about Hillary Clinton as well. I mean, if you're going to use labels, I'd be careful if I were David Brock. Look, to me, the most interesting thing is You'd be foolish, I think, to rule out the possibility of a Sanders nomination at this point, just because this is such a volatile election. Nobody can know exactly what's going to happen, and the things that seemed totally improbable 6 months ago or 8 months ago or 12 months ago are now, in fact, in many cases, actually happening. I think the risk with projecting out from Iowa and New Hampshire, and I would say in particular Iowa, is that if Bernie Sanders were to beat Hillary Clinton in Iowa, you would have a complete and total campaign reset. And it's hard, I think, from this point to imagine what that will look and feel like the day after Iowa.
Couldn't go left. I mean, it couldn't go more left.
No, but immediately the electability argument that David Brock is just making is out the window. I mean, remember, it was 52-3 a year ago. And if he beats her in Iowa, that is a political earthquake.
But I just said what the breakdown
after,
of the party is. I mean, yes, he can win with white Democrats, but can he win the Democratic Party?
I think everybody gives him a second look at that point, as has happened in previous
maybe it's the first
elections.
I mean, a lot of people
he's
not taking incoming the way that she is. Certainly not from the Republican Party, not in the media every day. So sure, she's going to get buffeted around a lot more, and he'd get a lot more of that. Again, you just look at go down the list of what he's for. Most Americans are not for that. Most Democrats are not for that. I mean, liberal.
But as Brett said, she's voted with them 93% of the time.
Right, but those are areas that things that came up for a vote in the Senate. That's different from what he's actually running on that he says that he wants to do. And by the way, I mean, I'm with you. She can't go further left. I mean, she was to the right of Obama on national security and will remain so. And
she doesn't tout that at the debates. I mean, she embraces President Obama fully. I mean,
which I just think is a problem. I think that's going to be hard to sustain. That's just hard to sustain.
If she is denied a nomination, it's not going to be from Bernie Sanders. It is simply inconceivable, no matter what happens in Iowa or New Hampshire, that he prevails with the Democratic electorate having the ethnic and racial composition that it does. I mean, Bernie is a candidate of the coastal elites and college towns, and that's it. I mean, his attempt to outreach beyond that, I think, are almost laughable. I think the one way in which the nomination is not hers, again, has to do with her email troubles. If she is, there's a criminal referral, even if she isn't indicted, I can see a collapse, at which point it will not be Sanders. I think at that point he might have a chance. If it's a wide open race, maybe you get Elizabeth Warren, you'd certainly get Biden. But they may already have forfeited a lot of delegates by not meeting the filing deadlines. But, I mean, that can be fixed by the
convention.
Has some of those delegates.
I mean, you have to, one vote, they could say no delegate has to stay with the person that they're committed to.
But you've got to be careful, because that would be a little bit like the Maduro people in Venezuela reversing the results of the election, which were quite obvious
Maduro's
in Venezuela. Right, well, he'd put a hammer and sickle up there, too. Actually, he could be a running mate for Sanders.
But there is actually, to your point, Joe, I mean, there's a vibrant Democratic establishment that would have a play here.
Correct.
The thing is different than
I could
on the
see
Republican
them
side.
denying him, but I mean, it would be a bloodbath.
Let me be clear. Let me just be clear about what I'm saying.
That'd be something if the Republican and the Democratic convention
fantastic.
just fell to.
Oh, it would be
chaos. Great story.
Totally.
I'm not projecting a Sanders nomination. I'm not projecting a Sanders nomination, but
you're clearly behind it.
But to your point, okay, NBC News. But to your point directly, I don't think you can say it's inconceivable that Sanders could be the nominee, because we were saying it was inconceivable that Donald Trump would be the nominee 6 months ago. I mean,
well, we're occasionally.
I've learned from those previous
but
projections.
Not twice in a row.
Look, it could happen.
Here's the thing. Dave Levine asks, where will Martin O'Malley caucus goers go when he falls below 15% in each caucus, which he will, and that is right. From the Democratic side, you have to stand in the firehouse or the schoolhouse,
right,
and you get together, and if you're not at 15%, all those people then get absorbed to other candidates. And he is at 5.2%, and the separation between the two, Clinton and Sanders, is roughly 5%.
I don't really see him as a factor. I think the 5.2% is probably inflated. People who will show up and be O'Malley. I mean, I rarely seen a weaker campaign weaker debate performance than what
I
O'Malley
gotta
has
think they're
done.
closer to Sanders, though, than they are to her.
I talked to the 6 of them when I was in Iowa the other day, and they're all going to Sanders.
Yeah.
The six O'Malley
Also,
supporters.
But even if she loses Iowa, I mean, it's not like Obama. Obama was a hurricane.
Right.
Obama had an appeal.
And he had strength much later,
And he
too.
had strength in the South. He had, I mean,
Right.
to the expanded the base of the party. No, I think it's got to be, again, I think Comey's the one who decides what happens to Hillary Clinton.
And you saw their pushback today, saying it's old news, it's innocuous,
It's a vast
it's
conspiracy.
the
There's a conspiracy.
it's the argument over classification.
Yeah, I know.
It's-
Look, I don't think that has an effect on the electorate, particularly the Democratic electorate.
Yeah, I agree with
But I do think all that matters right now is what the FBI does. And after our discussion yesterday about the nature of these emails that she had allowed to be on a private, a vulnerable server, I find it very hard to believe that there would be no action on the part of the FBI.
So if you both think that this has no effect on Hillary's standing among Democrats, how do you explain her drop from mid to late December to where she is today?
Bad campaign?
I think a lot of the drop is a result of the emails. and
You're saying from
lies.
this point
Yeah,
forward,
from this
okay.
point. I mean, she's hit rock bottom. If there's any Democrat who still believes in her honesty and integrity, it's hard to imagine there's anything that's going to change that.
But I also think, I think it's a lot of populism in the party, and I think it's people who are more liberal in the party, who are disappointed with Obama, who don't see her as any kind of agent of change or see her as the future. I mean, I really do think that the issue, even the credibility issue, do you not trust her and all of that, I think really shows up more in independent voters, yellow dog Democrats, that kind of thing.
But doesn't it say something about the nature of the status of the party post-Obama, that given a candidate so obviously vulnerable and weak, offering a tired rerun of just about everything of the 90s, a rerun of Obama, that they cannot put up candidates who would have a chance at having some appeal. Sanders is pretty out there. That he is the one guy, he's in his 70s. I mean, Obama really decimated the farm teams of the Democrats, unlike the Republicans, who have a lot of strong.
Well, and
strong
what's
people.
funny is that the Democratic Party's become more like the Republican Party, which is, it's kind of now it's her turn. Obama sidestepped, came in, and now there's a feeling that in the party that, well, that's got to be hers now.
But who would be plausible? I mean, who could have run if they had to reconsider this?
Tim Kaine,
Maybe, yeah.
Senator from Virginia.
You could see it
Mark
happening
Warner
in the
would have
next cycles.
been
Andrew
eager.
Cuomo.
Yeah.
Okay, it's snowing in D.C.
Yeah.
18 to 24 inches expected. There it is. Big flakes.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
Everyone is scared.
are not inflated flakes.
Milk.
And that's a sign
Bread.
of how bad it's going to
But
be.
we get a break before it really hits, right? I mean, it's,
Yeah,
you get
this is a
like a
dusting.
precursor,
Except
and then we
us
get.
quasi-Canadians like me and Ted Cruz.
Apparently, the
This is
traffic
a-
is heinous.
Really, right now?
Right now,
But this is a challenge. This is not a.
We can't handle this.
Yeah.
No,
that's terrible.
this is
It's
way
only the
beyond-
seat of federal government.
It
But
is.
we
It's
can't
way
plow
beyond-
the streets.
It's embarrassing. As a Wisconsin,
I don't
it's
need a, I don't
embarrassing.
need a winter storm warning. I see an advisory. I change plans. There'll be no child games. I won't step
Exactly.
outside the front door.
Washingtonians panic when it rains, let alone
Exactly.
snow.
True.
All right, we will leave it there. Panel, thank you as always. And be careful out there. Drive safely. We'll see you next time.
Go Street Blues.